Welcome Alan Pemberton with a Mystery Hour, and Alan's guest this evening is Colin Fry. Hello, gentlemen.
Hi there, Chris. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How about you?
What about old Simsy then?
Yes, I'm sure he's fine, because
He's
in the
sunning
States,
himself,
I think,
isn't he? He's sunning himself. Where's he, in Florida?
I think it's Florida.
Yeah, so he's sunning himself and probably somebody else named Simsy.
Yes, indeed.
He's having a great time. Okay. Oh, it's nice to have you here tonight.
Thank you very much.
And nice to have my guest here tonight, Colin Fry, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Mystery Hour. Colin, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Alan.
You've
Yes.
travelled from where tonight?
Haywards Heath.
Do you know, I've been talking about you for weeks.
I know, I
Mystery
have been
Hour.
listening, yes.
No, I've got you here. You're in the studio, and you're going to tell us all about physical mediumship.
That's what we're going to talk about tonight, yes.
What about, let's start at the beginning. How long have you been a physical medium?
I've been developing physical mediumship for nearly 10 years now.
Right. What is it?
Physical mediumship is where, under the right circumstances, seance conditions, those from the spirit world can manifest in our world, making themselves physically heard, physically felt, and sometimes physically seen.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Because I was privileged about you. God, when I spoke to you on the phone, I couldn't believe it was so many years ago.
Yeah, it's nearly
3 or 4 years ago.
3 or 4 years ago,
I
yeah.
came to. So is that the word we use now? Seance.
Seance, yes,
Right,
or a circle, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But we I suppose the traditional word is a seance.
Yeah. Yeah, there are all sorts of. I don't know. People have funny feelings about seances.
Yeah, I
don't
know.
they?
It's probably because of, I suppose, Noel Coward started it all off with Blythe's Spirit. You know, it's not little old ladies sitting around in the dark saying, "Is there anybody there?"
No, it's not.
It tends to people that become dedicated sitters for physical mediumship tend to be of all age groups, all walks of life, just people that have got a sincere commitment to communication with the other world, to help develop usually one person as the physical medium. And I've been very fortunate in the last 9 years. I've had a very committed home circle that have helped with my development.
Is that very important, Colin, that, the same people come along and you meet at the same time?
Oh, yes, it's
Yeah.
very important indeed. You know, I mean, if the medium is going to develop the ability, you have to have a committed circle that will turn up and sit every week at exactly the same time for exactly the same time to allow the, the spirit controls to develop the mediumship and the medium from their side of life, as well as to develop the circle. So yes, it's very important.
It's an incredibly exciting thing, isn't it? I mean, it's not ordinary.
Well, I try not to be blasé about it, because yes, it is. It is incredibly exciting.
Well, I mean, that kind of interface between this world and the next, it's got to be...
For people that have not had the experience and still think of it as incredible, I suppose, yes, it is. But I suppose because it's something that I've lived with all my life, it's very normal to me. I've often said that I sometimes feel as though I'm more in that world than I am in this world. I don't... Because I hear and see and experience those that have passed into the next dimension most of the time, I don't think of it as anything strange. I suppose really as a child that was the thing that was the most difficult for me to come to terms with, not being able to understand at a young age why other people didn't experience the things that I did.
What did you experience as a child?
Oh, from a very young age. I mean, the first spirit control or spirit friend that I can remember was probably from about the age of about 2 until I was 5. A little boy called Bobby, who was with me. It got to such ridiculous proportions that my mother would be able to tell you that she had to lay the place at the table for Bobby, because and then I remember...
Did you see Bobby, or
yes,
did you hear him? Yeah.
Physically sort of saw him, and he would tell me about things that I suppose I wasn't supposed to know, which would then surprise my family that I would come out with things that I wasn't supposed to know. I was very fortunate that I have a mother that's very sympathetic to mediumship and understanding of mediumship. And I suppose in very subtle ways my mother helped with my development right up until I went into my late teens, when I started doing clairvoyant sittings for people. I started off in the early days working with tarot cards because I found that was more acceptable to people.
Right.
Even though I was really only using them as a prop, for people to focus on.
Would you know who was communicating through you? Would you know who the spirit entity was? Say when you were, let's say when you were using the tarot cards or whatever.
Oh yes,
Would you
I'd
have a particular voice?
I'd have very clear impressions of the people that were communicating with me, and sometimes not so clear. Sometimes, you know, when you're working clairvoyantly or with mental mediumship. I try and say mental mediumship rather than clairvoyance, because clairvoyance actually means to see spirit, and there's a number of gifts of mental mediumship. So when you're working with mental mediumship, yes, sometimes you hear it very, very clearly, and sometimes you see the image of the person that's communicated very clearly. Sometimes it's not quite so distinct as that, and it tends to come as images and symbols, and it's really only by experience that you learn to interpret these.
So you've also got to filter out, I would think. You'd have to filter out your own interpretation of the thoughts that are coming through.
Because
as well.
all mediumship comes through the mind, and with the best will in the world, your mind is going to interfere to some extent. And again, this is only with development and training that you learn to filter out the superfluous information.
All the clutter.
Yeah.
That's coming through, yes. The night that I attended that particular séance, I have to say, I've actually mentioned on the Mystery Hour quite a few times, I suppose in a way of verifying, if you like, that I've experienced this thing. There were probably 4 or 5 very distinct voices, very different voices. One was an opera singer, another one I think was a young boy, there was a sort of like a Cockney lady coming through. Now I know at that point that you were in deep trance.
That's right. Yes.
And also I was embarrassed to be asked to examine the ties that were on your arm,
The
because
bonds,
you were actually tied
well,
up.
it is by my own request that I am bound, because most of the people that come along to the seances that I do are either bereaved or quite sincere people interested in investigation. And because the seances have to be conducted in the dark, I like them to be satisfied that everything is above board.
Right. Yes, because that's what I felt quite embarrassed, because I had no reason.
Right.
I met George and all the rest of it.
Yeah. There, of course, is another reason why I'm bound as well, and this is something that's happened throughout the history of physical mediumship. As I've said, all mediumship does come initially through the process of the mind, and if you're having a thought or an impulse from the spirit side of life sent through the mind process to say phenomena is to happen, by the very nature that your body is designed to respond to thought. There have been many physical mediums in the past that have been accused of being fraudulent, where in fact they haven't been fraudulent. Their body has just responded to a thought that has been passed through their mind. And in fact there's a very famous medium
point, actually,
called Eusebia Palladino, and she would say, if you do not restrain me, I will unintentionally fake it, because she knew that if she wasn't controlled, the thought would pass through her mind and she would do what should have been done by paranormal means.
That is very interesting, yes.
So, you know, there have been a lot of physical mediums in the past that have been very unfairly accused of fraud, where in fact they weren't fraudulent at all. It's just that the precautions of restraining them weren't taken.
Very interesting. One of the most amazing things about that particular evening, apart from the voice, and what's the name of the guy that comes through? It begins with an M.
Magnus. Magnus is my principal control.
But that was evidence indeed, because Magnus was talking, and if I could explain to the listeners that this voice appeared to be, or one's only hearing it, but it appeared to be coming from a particular place in the room, like the centre of the room or something. But it also sounded very like, at this point you're completely out of it.
I'm completely out of it.
You're completely out of it, so you wouldn't actually know what was going on there at all. But it sounded just like a voice that was coming through the wind. That's how it sounded to me.
Yeah.
And the fact that there was a conversation going on between people in the circle and Magnus, that talking about whether you were actually emotionally fit enough to go to some, I think it was some sort of weekend seminar or something at the time. Northamptonshire, something like that, if memory serves me.
That's right.
And that was quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And that was highly evidential as far as I'm concerned, because there was an actual conversation
It's a
going
good,
on.
I mean, that point that you
But
raised,
you don't know anything about
no,
that,
I have
do you?
no awareness of what happens in the seances at all. But you see, the other point you made about my circle, checking things out with the controls, you see, that's a very good example of their dedication to the circle. Their paramount concern is always for my well-being and my safety, and they always check things out with that side of life before before I go off and do any public work for physical phenomena. And if they say no, it has to be no.
Right. The other thing, which was really was demonstrating the incredible energy that's around, is because you are actually on a sort of like a small chaise lounge, I think, if I remember correctly.
An armchair, a low-slung armchair with arms. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was actually in the sort of a bay window at the
That's
time.
right. Yeah, we call it a cabinet.
A cabinet, yeah.
Yeah.
But at the end of this thing, I mean, it was quite a shock, actually, because we were all in darkness, and I will ask you about that, if I may, in a few minutes' time, about why it's always conducted in darkness. Well, there was this enormous thump on the floor, which made me jump out of my skin, literally. I was really, really shocked. And then the lights were put on, because obviously that was the end of it.
Yeah.
Does that happen quite regularly?
Oh, yes, yeah. I
But
mean,
you were actually...
the chair was levitated out.
Was
of the
levitated
cabinet.
out. There is
Yeah.
no way. I mean, we were in it's a very small room,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no way, I mean, if you were looking for any sort of fraud, there's no way that it would take 4 men to lift that.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So
yeah.
do you actually know that you're being levitated and dropped into the floor at that stage, or do you come round at that point?
No, it's just something I've got used to.
Yeah. Does that actually bring you out of the trance?
Once, the reason why they levitate me out of the cabinet is that this contained area that's curtained off, which we call the cabinet, is an area where they condense the energy, and then from the cabinet it's taken outwards into the room to form voice boxes for them to speak through, all the materialised forms which they then go around and touch and greet people. And the reason that they use the cabinet is because, as I say, it's to condense and to consolidate the energy. But because they build up such an energy in that area, once the seance has come to an end, it's then important for them to get me out of that energy area, so that I can be brought back into a state of consciousness.
Yeah, it's got to be, well, I don't know, it's seen to be believed, it's got to be heard to be believed.
Yes, yeah.
Because I mean, you and the chair, that's one hell of a weight.
See,
And why do they drop it with such force? It goes bang!
I think they probably think that they place it down very gently.
They probably, yes. They can't gauge the, gauge the energy.
I mean, we've had some amazing experiences over the years. I mean, again, this is only, of course, believable to the people who were there, but I can, assure you it happened. And we sit in a locked room. There is no lock on the outside of the door. The key is pocketed by a member of the circle. And we had one occasion a number of years back where the seance came to an end, and the lady in my circle who has the job of calling me back kept calling my name, apparently, to no response. And this went on for quite some time, so they decided to take the calculated risk of bringing the light up a little bit. And they brought the light up a little bit, and sure enough, the chair was in the centre of the room with all the bonds intact, and but no me. And I wasn't in the room at all. So they drew back the curtain across the door, unlocked the door, went through into the adjoining room, and in the corner of the room, still in trance, I was tied up with my own tie and my own belt with knots that were so tight that it took 2 of the circle members a good 10 minutes to undo them. So they had actually physically transported me from one room into another.
Oh, gosh, I can believe it.
And that, of course, that was witnessed by, the 6 or 7 people that were actually in the circle. I don't expect, your listeners to accept that as absolute, but I assure you it happened.
Yeah. Well, having seen that, part of that sort of phenomena myself, I can believe it. We're going to take a break now.
Okay.
Well, and then we're going to run out of time on the Mystery Hour tonight. I know we are. It goes so quickly. Chris, we're going to take a break now, shall we?
Windowcraft, everybody's 3 Hour is brought to you with Sign Wizard of Compton Street, Eastbourne.
My guest tonight is Colin Fry, you've become an international medium now. Do you describe yourself as a deep trance medium, or because you also do clairvoyance as well, don't you?
I just describe myself as a medium. And that way I leave myself open to
Actually,
people
medium.
to come and see me for, for whatever, if they want a clairvoyant reading, or if they want to come along for a trance sitting, or if they want to apply to come along to one of the seances, or, one of the workshops I do.
Colin, when you say coming along to a trance medium thing, I mean, like I did, there were a group of people there, presumably. I mean, you can't do a one-to-one on a trance medium.
Oh yeah, for a trance for a trance sitting, yes, I can.
How does that work then?
Well, that is when, rather than producing the ectoplasmic substance to make the voice independent, so it's not seance conditions, I just sit down, I allow them to take control of my mind, I go into a deep trance state, and then one of my controls will come through and talk about, answer questions from the person that's come along, or
really?
talk about events that are happening in their life, and give, the spirit side of life's view of, of what's happening for them.
Do you, I mean, if you had somebody, say for instance, I was to come along to you for a deep trance medium sitting, and I had an aunt or whatever, or a father or somebody in spirit, would the voice come through as you, or would it come through as...
It would come through with the characteristics of the person.
Would it really?
Yeah. It's not that common that relatives and friends come through and speak through me in trance. It has happened, and it does happen. But the purpose of a trance sitting is more for guidance, and I suppose, if you like, spiritual counselling from that side of life. Clairvoyant sittings are more a case of when I get links and describe people that may be sort of loved ones for people. And then, of course, in the seance conditions, if the circumstances are right and the spirit is able to, and they can create the right conditions, then sometimes people's loved ones will materialise or speak in seance conditions. And that's I suppose over the last 9 or 10 years, I wouldn't even like to think how many people have been through and been, reunited with their loved ones this side of life.
That must be such an exciting moment for people when that happens. I mean, it must be so wonderful.
It's, I mean, from the times when I get sort of really fed up with it and think, I'm going to give this all up, it's not worth the flack and the aggravation, then something happens. Do you mind if I tell the story?
Please tell that. It's just such a wonderful story, that.
This was earlier in the year. I think it was about August time. A gentleman that had been attending my organised seances for about a year phoned me up one morning and said, could he come along to the seance that evening? And I said, yeah, well, of course you can, you're a regular attender. And he came along, and the seance began, and one of the controls came through and said they were going to attempt something that was rather difficult, because the person that they wanted to bring through hadn't been their side of life for very long. And the control withdrew, and with that the footsteps could be heard moving across the floor towards this gentleman, and his hands were taken by a materialised form, and he then engaged in conversation, 20-minute conversation with his wife, who had only passed the spirit at 8 o'clock that morning. And nobody, not even the friends that he'd come with, knew that his wife had passed over. He decided that he would keep it quiet just to see if something did happen. And he was absolutely ecstatic, that his wife had materialised and spoke in her own voice, sort of like 12 hours after her passing. Now, that is very unusual. I mean, there must have been exceptional circumstances, and it may well have helped that the lady concerned had been a medium herself.
Sure.
But I mean, with my circle leader, I mean, his wife returned within 2 weeks, spoke in the independent voice in her own voice, and there was a gentleman from Bristol who came, and his wife came back and spoke after 9 days.
This was that first example that you gave us. That was quite recent, wasn't it?
Oh, that was in August of this, about August of this year.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful, isn't it?
But yeah, it's the really moving ones where people are absolutely I've had people sort of throw their arms around me in tears, sort of thanking me, and obviously
you don't really know
I don't know what's happened, but it still touches me. It's someone once said to me, why do you work as a medium? Why bother, with all the aggravation and the flack and the criticism and
there's a lot of that, isn't there?
And
there's
the cynicism that is thrown at you. Why do it? And I said, well, I could go through the rest of my life and I had a good job, you know, and I enjoyed my job, and I'm working professionally as a medium now. But it's to be able to have that effect on people's lives, to be able to give them comfort, you know, to be able to show that, you know, as my main control Magnus says, death is the greatest lie we are ever told. There is no death. And okay, a lot of the people come along to my meetings or to the seances or for private sittings with me probably have a feeling about that already. But I do get a large number of people that really just don't know. And to be able to, under whatever gift of mediumship that is used at the time, to be able to show them that their loved one is not dead, you know, because you know the word death is so final, and it's not final. It's an onward life, and we carry on living, and under certain circumstances, and with the gift of certain people, it can be shown that life does carry on, does continue. And I think that once people have discovered that and realised that and have had experience of that, it gives a greater depth and dimension to your life.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't. You put that beautifully. I mean, the greatest message, you know, is to say, as you've just said, there is no death, and that's the hardest thing, because people walk around not just completely desolate through bereavement.
Oh yeah, I mean,
that's an awful thing.
You know, I mean, it's
a natural thing.
I have some of the most tragic cases come to me that you could imagine. You know, people totally devastated. You know, children have died. See, I'm using the word myself now. People have passed over. Children have passed over tragically young. People killed in terrible accidents. People who really passed over, which we could fairly say before their time. People that committed suicide, you know, and to be able to come along and just to hear or to have an experience of the fact that that person still lives, but, you know, just in a different state. And I think the important thing is that it helps people to realise that the afterlife is not something far and distant. It's another dimension that mixes and permeates us, and it's all around us. And it's not something, you know, a long, long way away. It's all around us.
In and about us.
Yeah, and under certain circumstances, we can just open that door a little bit, and we can have a glimpse of it and an experience
and
of
so
it.
you do. This is brilliant work that you do. We had on, only by telephone, unfortunately, quite recently, we had Ron Pearson.
Yeah, I know of Ron Pearson.
You know Ron Pearson.
Yeah, I know of Ron Pearson.
And his work where he's trying to explain these things.
Yes.
And simplify it in terms of science.
That's right.
And he's absolutely right,
Yeah.
you know.
I've never personally met Ron Pearson, but I've read quite a lot of his
Oh,
work,
he's a lovely man.
and I've got a
Lovely
lot
man.
of respect for what he's trying to do. And I think as far as the scientific community goes, he's one of few. I have met some scientists in recent years that have got a very healthy attitude towards investigating the continuation of life and the phenomena related to it. But as I say, unfortunately, they are the few. But with a lot of the scientific community, they tend to have this attitude that if it cannot be examined under a microscope or seen in a test tube, you know, measured, weighed, then it doesn't exist. And they just will not break from that attitude. There are a few, as I say, that are more open to investigating spirit communication and spirit phenomena with a much more open mind.
But historically, those people, I mean, we've had some great scientists that got involved in that, and their careers were absolutely
I mean,
ruined.
the likes of people like Sir William Crookes,
That's
one of the most eminent scientists of his time. And, you know, the scientific community tried to discredit him. I mean, they said he'd gone mad when they couldn't really find anything to scientific to disprove what he was saying. I mean, they started this slander of the fact that he was having an affair with the medium that he was investigating. I mean, he was a man in his 80s and was being accused of having an affair with a woman in her 20s. I mean, it was scandalous. You know, it was disgusting.
Yes. Sir Oliver Lodge.
Sir Oliver Lodge, yeah. Sir Oliver Lodge
absolutely.
was another one, you know.
These men that did great work, just
Great
totally
work.
acceptable,
Yeah.
and offered
Great men
and
of science.
contributed a great deal to life.
Yeah.
As soon as they started to investigate subjects which were looked upon as risque, or
And unfortunately, in
Their
that
careers
respect,
were rocked
in that
to
respect,
heavens.
not a lot has changed, because many of the scientists now that have an interest in investigating and examining spirit phenomena and mediumship, you know, they really are sneered upon by the rest of the scientific community.
you work with spirit pretty well every day. I mean, that's
Every
your,
day.
That's,
Every day.
that's your life, isn't
It's
it?
my
Yeah.
life,
Do
yeah.
you ever get a glimpse? Do they ever give you a glimpse as to what,
Oh yes.
what that world
Yeah.
is like?
People often
Just
say
give
to
us a little.
me,
Just give us a little bit on
No,
that.
people often say to me, "Do you believe in the afterlife?" And I say, "No, I don't believe. I know, because I've seen it. I've experienced it." But that's not always easy to put into words to explain to people. I mean, when I come back into a conscious state after having worked in the trance state, how can you describe to somebody colours that do not exist in our spectrum? How can you explain sights that there's nothing to compare it to? And I'd have to say, to be honest, that when I come back into the conscious state, my physical mind is not really completely capable of comprehending
I understand that.
everything that I've
Exactly what you're
seen.
saying, yes, yeah.
Within my inner self, I know what I've experienced, I know what I've seen, but there are no words that can give full meaning to everything that I've experienced. And my mind can only give me as near as.
Because of your immediate physical limitations.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
why you're here. Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's-
You're all over the place at the moment. You're all over the world, aren't you?
Yeah, I've just come back from Switzerland. I was in Australia for 5 weeks in
You liked it down
September
there,
and
didn't you?
October. I loved Australia. The
Why
Australian
did
people
it?
love
Was there? What was that? Was there a freer atmosphere, or just the climate, or the country? Or
The
what?
country's beautiful, and physical mediumship and, unfortunately, trance work to some extent, because, I mean, away from the physical mediumship, we've had great trance mediums in the past, you know, the likes of Estelle Roberts and Ursula Roberts, who recently passed over.
Well, sorry, this is in Australia.
No, this is in this country.
Right.
You know, we had great trance mediums and physical mediums, and the modern spiritualist movement has almost become a little bit embarrassed about trance mediumship and physical mediumship. And it is nice to see, not just myself, but there are others as well that are beginning to bring trance work and physical mediumship back into spiritualism, and of course making it available to people that wouldn't necessarily want to call themselves or
We'll
label
come-
themselves
We'll
spiritualists.
come on to that in a minute, because a lot of people want to know how they can contact you, because you do run workshops, don't you?
Yeah, I do. As well as doing the readings, I do organised seances and workshops as well.
Brilliant. Colin, what I want to ask you is, do you think that there are as many physical mediums, if you like, practicing today as there were, say, I don't know, around about 1930 and 32?
No, I don't.
But is there potentially, or are there potentially?
Potential is there. We have to look at the way modern life is. There is so much distraction now. Unfortunately, we live in a world where people want everything instantly. They want instant gratification. You know, I feel a bit of a hypocrite surrounded with all this computer equipment here, but you know, it's all computers and
It's all right
instant
usage,
graphics,
mate.
and you know, the development of mediumship takes time, especially physical mediumship. It takes time and patience and dedication. And just people want it instantly, you know. And unfortunately, even within the development of physical mediumship now, there are people that are looking for shortcuts. And there is no shortcut. You know, my circle leader and his wife, they had run my circle, or our circle, for 20 years before I joined them. So now at the 9-10 years that I've been sitting with them, that is a circle that's been sitting for 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that's 30 years of development. Spirit put me in place at the right time. Before me, my circle leader and his wife had sat with my circle leader's mother, who was an unknown but incredible physical medium who developed independent voice in broad daylight.
Really?
You know?
They say the timing is always perfect in spirit, don't
That's
they?
right.
We're running out of time. We've got about a minute, and I want, if you would, to let...
Sure.
If you could just let the
Yeah.
listeners know where, if they wish, they can
Yeah,
contact
if people
you.
would like to contact me...
Brilliant. Colin, thank you. I'll get Chris to give that another plug a bit later on for you, so if anybody missed it, they'll pick it up next time. Absolutely brilliant, Mystery Hour. Thank you very, very much for coming along tonight. We're just about there now, so carry on the good work, mate. It's been
Thank
a
you.
pleasure
It's
to have
been
you in
a
the
great
studio.
pleasure.
After all this time.
After all this time.
And maybe you'll come back another day.
Oh, I'll
and
certainly
we'll continue
come
this
back,
one,
yeah, because we've
always
only
run
just
out.
barely touched the subject
Always
tonight.
run out of time. We always
Yeah.
do with this show. Okay, thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you, Alan.
And thank you, Chris.
That's a
and
pleasure.
good night, everybody.
Excellent Mystery Hour.
Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.